talking about money, specifically, how much does it cost as a buyer to buy a home? So that's today's video. I'll go into some detail on this, try to give an overview, and then go into a little more detail. Also, I want to give you a little bit of a cheat, a hack, as a way to maybe not have to spend all this money, or at least not have it available to you to spend right away. So some of these numbers I'm going to base on kind of the average price of a home right now, because some of these numbers certainly are affected by the size of the house and the amount of the purchase and those types of things. So on average, we're selling about 185 right now. I'm just going to use 180 kind of as my base number. So the biggest variable in this is down payment. Are you doing a conventional loan? Um, by the way, there's some conventional loans in town that you can do. You have to have 500 into the loan program, so it's really good to have an experienced realtor that knows lots of different lenders and different options for you. But typically on a conventional loan, you're going to have at least 5%, and you could do a lot, but most people would consider maybe doing 20%. You certainly don't have to, but 20% would get rid of that PMI and reduce your down payment a little bit. But for lots of people, that's just not the best option. Maybe they do 5% and they use the rest of the money to pay off some other debt or something like that. But the largest variable will be that down payment. So I'm just going to kind of push that to the side for now. You know, if you're looking at the 180 purchase, your down payments on 5% down payment would be about $9,000. But for the rest of this, I'm just going to, since that's such an unknown variable, depending on circumstances and that, I'm just going to push that to the side a little bit. A really good lender, another reason you should know good lenders and good realtors, because they can get you in touch with lots of good people. But a good lender is going to talk to you kind of about your finances and your situation and what you want to do, and can help you decide which loan program would be the best. Do you want to try for FHA or USDA and do 0% down, but then eliminate some geographical areas? So there's options. Just consider that stuff. Next thing we're going to talk about is earnest money. Earnest money can be thought of as the buyer's good faith commitment on the process. It is not required, but I definitely encourage it, and especially in this market where it is a very strong seller's market, earnest money can be helpful, because without that, a buyer really can walk away and not lose out on anything. I always tell people, whether I'm representing a buyer or seller, that the seller has the most at risk in this transaction. Essentially, they've got at risk the value of the property. So the buyer absolutely should have some stake in things, and one way you do that is with earnest money. So it's definitely something I encourage and you should do. Fair amount. Some people talk about 1%. Really, in our market, that doesn't happen very often. What I see the most often is probably right around 1,000. So we're talking on this purchase price maybe 700 to 1,000, something like that, for earnest money. That will have to be deposited within 5 days of going under contract. That gets deposited and given to the title company and put in an escrow account, so it acts as a neutral third party until you get to closing, and then it can count towards your closing cost. Inspections, everyone's favorite part probably. And again, there's variables here, but if we're talking $180,000, you're probably talking 1,100, 1,500 maybe square foot home, somewhere in that area. Inspections are based on the size of the home, kind of starting point. So we'll say right about $400, depending on what company you go with. And then there's other things to consider with inspections too, like what all do you want them to inspect? That $400, is kind of the general home inspection, looking over all the systems of the home. But if you buy a basement home, you might want to consider radon. Radon's a cancer-causing agent, but it's typically only considered in a basement home because it settles in the lowest part of the home. So if you have a crawl space, then it's going to set on that crawl space. You're not living in that space, so it's not a concern. Another thing to consider would be if you're buying a home more in a rural area, you might want to consider doing a well inspection or a septic inspection. I certainly would encourage those two things. Those things will raise your inspection costs, but they definitely need to be looked at. The septic system, if something's wrong, that's many thousands of dollars likely uh, to have someone come in and fix. So inspection on a septic system, probably 150, 200 on a well. It's probably right around 100. So inspections can go up, but you're looking on average, I'd say 500. Um, the other thing you need to plan for is this kind of more on the financing side of things, but I definitely tell people to plan for this because I don't like people being surprised. So oftentimes I talk in too much detail, maybe scare people. A lot of people out there will just try to give a smooth talk and not prepare you so much. But I want my people well prepared. So you need to plan for some financing stuff. The appraisal. Some lenders will roll that in the closing cost, but some lenders will ask you to pay for that. Most probably ask you to pay for that at the time that appraisal is ordered. Appraisals right now gone up kind of like everything else. We've seen them right around 550 for a year or so now. But I'd say 550 to 600 is probably what you need to plan on for an appraisal. The other thing to keep in mind with appraisals and setting contract dates, especially if you're buying in a more rural area right now, it can be really hard to get those appraisals done. So you need to allow more time for that. It's just kind of a side note. Closing cost. That's the other big factor, but it's definitely going to be in there to where we pretty much have to plan on it, to where the down payment is, just a kind of unknown variable depending on the person. Closing cost, we can estimate that anywhere from 3.5% probably. But this is another good reason to have a really good local lender. We're going to have a local title company anyways, but a local lender can really help you with that and give you an understanding of what that's will look like and prepare for that well ahead of getting under contract. When you're just talking about things and figuring things out, and then you can be talking to your agent like me and saying, hey, here's what I'm looking at. How can we handle this? And that's where we get into the cheat. But let's jump back to closing costs real quick. So 3.5%, on 180. I mean, again, if you go by that, you're looking at 7,000 or something like that. Most time in our area, they really don't get that high. Most closing costs tend to be 4,000, especially for that 180 mark. Can be more around 4,000. And again, I know people that can be helpful on things. So, we'll just talk about things and we'll plan for it really well and come up with a strategy that really works for you. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So if at a bare minimum, you probably need to plan on paying out of pocket, we'll say $1,200 for this. And if you're paying this closing cost and a down payment, then obviously adds up a lot more from there. So if we're talking 180, you can pretty easily be at, if you're doing 5% conventional loan, I mean, you're pretty easy at $10,000 or $11,000. However, here's where the cheat comes into play. In the contract, there's what's called seller concessions. And if we read in one of the paragraphs, it specifically explains what seller concessions can cover. So seller concessions is, I'm writing in a dollar amount on the contract that I'm asking the seller to help pay essentially for buyer's cost. So whatever number you put in there from the seller perspective, they just would deduct that from their net proceeds. I obviously don't love that, but from the buyer perspective, now you can take that number and help pay for some of your costs. So those closing costs or inspections can even roll into that. The more we're going to roll into that, this is why strategy is important, but the more we're going to try to roll into that seller concessions. Um, the higher that number is going to be. So we just need to plan for that. We need to talk about what that's going to look like. If it's $2,000, not too big deal, pretty typical average, even in this market. You're still seeing quite a few people asking for seller concessions. It's just a lot less than it used to be. But there's still, um, if you need that, we'll talk about how much you need and what that needs to look like. But even in this market, it's very reasonable that you can have seller concessions and help you out with some of these costs. Probably the most common way for that to happen is it just gets added to the price of the sale. So if you're looking for 6,000 seller concessions, which is a lot and definitely going to be above average, um, we probably have to add some of that on top of, unless we just find someone who's desperate and just wants to get rid of the place. Most likely, you're going to have to add that on top of the sales price. So, if again, using 180, if the list price was 180, we may offer at 186 because you're asking for those $6,000 in seller concessions that you're going to use to try to help pay for all this other stuff that we've just talked about. And then that way, adding it on top, it essentially nets the seller the same as if you hadn't asked for anything and offered at 180. So that's how all that works. And there's definitely, can be kind of complicated, especially for someone who doesn't do this every day. I get that. But I'd love to talk more about this with you and answer questions you might have. Let's get some coffee or, meet up your favorite lunch place, whatever it might be. Give me a call. Again, Andy Simmons with Keller Williams. Love to chat. Send me a text, 417-766-4507. Thanks. Bye.